The first thing through the doors was the blood, and the second thing was the silence. Clara Bennett had worked night shifts at Boston Mercy long enough to know that the worst arrivals were never the loud ones. The screamers lived. It was the quiet bodies, the ones brought in by men who didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't beg, that made the back of her neck go cold. And the men who carried this one through the ambulance bay at 2:14 in the morning, with a blizzard turning the city white behind them, did not make a single unnecessary sound. 3 of them. Black coats soaked through snow melting in their hair, faces like closed doors. They did not look at the triage desk. They did not look at the security guard who rose halfway out of his chair and then, reading something in the room, sat back down. They looked only at the man on the gurney between them and at Clara, as if she were the last door left in a burning building. "Gunshot," the tallest of them said. "Just that. He stops breathing, you don't let him." The man on the gurney was perhaps 38 in a suit that had cost more than Clara made in 3 months. The white shirt beneath it gone crimson from collarbone to belt. His skin had the gray translucence of someone halfway out the door of his own body. And yet this was the part Clara would remember for the rest of her life. His eyes were open, pale slate-colored, fixed on the ceiling lights with the flat calm of a man watching weather. No fear, no pain on his face. Just that terrible, patient stillness, as though dying were merely an inconvenience he had decided not to permit. "Trauma 1, Clara said, and her voice did what it always did, dropped into the register that turned chaos into a list. "I need 2 units O-neg on the rapid infuser. I need pressure on that wound, now. Somebody page the on-call surgeon and tell him I don't care what he's doing." The man's gaze slid down from the ceiling and found her. It was nothing. It should have been nothing. She had 100 patients look at her every week with the helpless animal gratitude of people who think a nurse is the same thing as a miracle. This was not that. This was a man cataloging her hands, her face, the steadiness of her, and arriving at some private verdict, and then deciding to live a little longer in order to confirm it. "Stay," he said. His voice was barely a breath, but it carried. "You." "I'm not going anywhere," she told him, already cutting his shirt away, already pressing the heel of her hand into the ruin of his shoulder, hard enough to make a normal man scream. He didn't scream. He held her eyes the whole time, and his pulse impossibly slowed. She would think about that later, too, how the monitor had calmed because she was there, as if his body had been waiting for permission. What Clara did not know, as she fought for the next 40 minutes to keep a stranger's heart beating, was that she had just saved the life of Dario Moretti, and that the entire city of Boston, from the harbor to the State House, would have told her she'd have been better off letting him die. 2. He came back from the edge, somewhere around the 4th unit of blood, and when the surgeon finally peeled off his gloves and said the words he'll keep in the tired way of a man who had stopped being impressed by anything, Clara realized the hospital had changed around her without her noticing. There were men at the doors. Not security, not police. Men in dark coats, with the unhurried posture of people who owned the ground they stood on, positioned at the entrance to the trauma ward, at the elevators, at the stairwell, at the nurse's station, where Donna from the front desk sat with her hands folded and her face the color of paper. The fluorescent lights hummed, snow ticked against the black windows, and the ordinary night noise of an emergency department, the groans and the gurney wheels and the overhead pages, had been swallowed by something heavier. "What is happening?" Clara said to no one to the room. The tall man from the ambulance bay detached himself from the wall. Up close he had a long scar through one eyebrow, and the kind of stillness that made you want to keep your hands where he could see them. "Mr. Moretti is awake," he said. "He's asking for you." Moretti. The name meant something. It meant something to everyone in this city the way a sound in the dark means something. Clara had read it in headlines she scrolled past. Federal probe racketeering. No charges. Witness recanted. The Dario Moretti. There's only one. She should have been afraid. Some part of her, the part that had grown up smart and cautious and alone, was screaming at her to walk to the staff exit and not look back. But the larger part of Clara Bennett was simply bone-deep tired, and tiredness has a way of burning off fear like fog. She walked into the recovery bay with her chin up. He was propped against the pillows, an IV in the back of one hand, that gray gaze tracking her from the moment she crossed the threshold. Even gutted, even gray, Even with a drain in his shoulder, he filled the room. It was something in the economy of him, the way he didn't waste a single movement, didn't perform pain or gratitude or charm. He simply existed at the center of things, and the things arranged themselves around him. "You're awake," she said. "You shouldn't be. Your body lost more blood than it had any business surviving. I had a reason to come back." His voice was stronger now, low and unhurried, each word set down like a chess piece. "What's your name?" "Clara." A beat. "Bennett." Something flickered across his face there and gone, fast as a fish under ice. She would only understand it much later. At the time, she thought it was pain. "Clara Bennett," he said it as if testing the weight of it. "You held my heart in your hands tonight, Clara Bennett. Do you understand what that means? It means you're going to live. It also means you need to lie still because I did not spend 40 minutes. It means," he said, gently, terribly, "that no one in this city will ever touch you again without answering to me." The room went very quiet. The scarred man at the door did not move, but Clara felt the temperature of the whole ward drop a degree, as if a promise had been made that everyone but her already knew how to read. "I don't want anything from you," she said, and was proud that her voice didn't shake. "I want you to follow post-op instructions, and I want your men to stop frightening my patients." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the memory of where a smile might go in a face that had clearly not made the trip in a long time. "There she is," he murmured to himself. The hospital stayed locked down until dawn. 3. She told herself it would end when he was discharged. It did not end. 3 nights later, the second man came. Clara was restocking the supply room off the trauma corridor, the part of the job no one filmed for television. The gauze and the saline and the small white boxes, when she heard the wrongness in the hallway. Not a sound. The removal of sound. The ambient hum of the ward dropping out. The way a forest goes silent before something large moves through it. She stepped into the corridor and saw a man in scrubs who was not a nurse. She knew it the way you know a counterfeit bill by feel before you can say why. The scrubs too clean. The lanyard, ID, turned backward. The eyes that weren't reading charts but reading doors. He was walking toward the recovery wing where Dario Moretti lay healing, and his right hand was inside his waistband. And Clara's body understood what was about to happen, a full second before her mind did. Afterward, she could never fully explain why she didn't run. Maybe because running was a thing she'd done as a child and sworn never to do again. Maybe because there was a man down that hall who had bled out under her hands, and she had decided, somewhere she didn't examine, that he was hers to keep alive. She stepped into the false nurse's path and said, loudly, brightly, the most ordinary sentence in the world. "Sir, this wing is restricted. Can I see your badge?" He looked at her, and in his flat consideration she saw her own death get briefly calmly weighed. Then everything happened at once. A door banged. The scarred man Matteo, she would learn his name was Matteo, came out of the recovery bay, already moving, and the false nurse's hand came up out of his waistband with the gun in it. And Clara was suddenly, impossibly, not where she had been standing, because a forearm like a steel bar had swept across her chest and turned her and put her behind 200 pounds of bleeding, furious man. Dario Moretti had gotten out of the bed. He stood between Clara and the gun, in a hospital gown with the surgical drains still taped to his shoulder, and he did not look like a wounded man. He looked like the last thing a number of people had ever seen. The gunshots, when they came, were enormous in the corridor, 3 of them, fast, and Clara felt his body jerk and brace and hold, felt his hand close around her wrist behind his back and grip it so hard it left a bruise shaped like devotion. Then it was over. The false nurse was a heap on the linoleum, and Matteo was standing over him, and somewhere an alarm was finally uselessly screaming. Clara came around Dario's body, shaking, her training already reaching for him. "Where are you? Hit, let me see," and found with a vertigo she'd remember forever that he wasn't. His old wound had torn and bled through the gown, but the new bullets had found the wall and the floor, and the dead man, not him. He had stepped in front of a gun for a woman he had known for 3 days, and the thing in his eyes when he turned to look down at her was not relief that he had survived. It was relief that she had. "You," he said low, almost angry, "you walked toward it. You got out of the bed. she shot back, and to her horror her eyes were burning. You ripped your sutures, you absolute. He lifted his free hand and very deliberately, as if it were the most dangerous thing he had done all night, brushed a fleck of someone else's blood off her cheek with his thumb. He stopped just short of letting his hand rest there. She watched him stop. She watched him decide not to. They came for me, he said quietly. Next time they will come for you, because now they know. Know what? His gaze moved over her face like a man memorizing a country he was about to lose. That you matter to me, he said, and men like me are not allowed to have things that matter. 4. He did not ask her to leave the hospital with him. He simply made the alternative impossible. By morning, her shift manager had been told kindly, with a generous severance and a new position waiting whenever she wanted it, that Clara Bennett was taking leave. By afternoon, her apartment in Dorchester had 2 men outside it, in a black SUV, and the building's broken front lock had been silently expensively repaired. By evening, Matteo was at her door with a coat over his arm, and the flat courtesy of a man delivering an order dressed as a request. Mr. Moretti would prefer you somewhere safe until this is finished, he said. I would also prefer it. The man in the hospital was not the last. And if I say no, Matteo considered her with something that might, in a softer man, have been respect. Then we stay outside in the cold and watch your windows and pray we're faster than whoever comes. He'll never force you, but he'll never stop either. Which was how Clara Bennett came to be standing that night in a penthouse 40 floors above a Boston turned to black glass and falling snow, in a place so silent and so beautiful it felt less like a home than a held breath. It was all stone and shadow and low gold light. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the storm-lit harbor the city smeared to watercolor. There were no photographs anywhere, no clutter, no evidence that anyone lived here, rather than simply waited in it. And there was Dario, by the window, his arm in a sling, watching her reflection in the glass. Instead of turning around, as if he didn't quite trust himself to look at her directly. You hate it, he said. I think it's the loneliest room I've ever stood in, she answered, and I work nights in a hospital. That turned him. The slate eyes found her, and for a moment, the mask of the man Boston feared slipped, and underneath it was something she recognized from 1,000 patients in the worst hour of their lives. A person who had been alone so long, he no longer had words for it. Why me? She said. You don't know me. You owe me nothing. People save your life professionally, I assume. No, he said simply. They keep me alive because they're afraid of what happens to them if they don't. You didn't know who I was. He took a step closer, careful of the sling. Careful, she thought of her. You put your hands inside me, and you weren't afraid, and you weren't impressed, and you didn't want anything. Do you have any idea how long it has been since someone looked at me like I was just a man dying on a table? The honesty of it was almost unbearable. She had to look away from him to keep her footing. This is temporary, she said. When it's safe, I go back to my life. Yes, he agreed, in the voice of a man agreeing to a thing he had already privately decided to fight to the end of the earth. When it's safe. That night she lay awake in a guest room bigger than her whole apartment and listened to the storm. And once, late, she heard him in the hall outside her door, not knocking, not entering, just there, the way the SUV had been, there, the way the repaired lock had been, there. A presence positioned between her and the dark. She told herself she found it suffocating. She told herself a great many things that winter that turned out not to be true. 5. The slow days that followed were the most dangerous, because they were the ones in which she stopped being afraid of him. It came in pieces. The way he made coffee for her without being asked, and set it down at exactly the distance a stranger leaves it never closer. The way he listened fully with terrible attention when she talked about the patients she'd lost, about her mother dead 8 years now of a heart that simply gave out, about the father she'd lost at 7, in a car accident she barely remembered. The way he never once touched her, though she began to catch the cost of it on his face. The way his hand would lift toward her and then fold itself back into stillness by sheer will, as if touching her were a line he had drawn for himself and would die before crossing without permission. And the way that when she stood too close to him by the window one night, and the city light caught her face. He looked at her with such naked, helpless hunger that she had to step back, heart slamming, and pretend to be cold. "You stopped yourself," she said. The words were out before she could stop them. "I will always stop myself," he said, "until you tell me not to." A pause. And maybe even then. It should have frightened her. Instead, it undid something in her chest she hadn't known was knotted. The fracture came on the 9th day. She'd been looking for a blanket. The penthouse was always cold, as if heat were one more thing he'd never bothered to want. And she opened a door she assumed was a closet and found instead a small, windowless room. And on the wall of that room, she found herself. Photographs. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Clara at the hospital. Clara on the tee. Clara as a college student. Clara as a teenager with a haircut she'd cried over. Clara as a child. Gap-toothed, sun-squinting, standing in front of a house she didn't recognize, beside a tall man whose face had been circled in red. Surveillance logs. Dates going back years. Years before she had ever heard the name Moretti. Years before the blizzard. Years before the blood. She heard him behind her, and she turned with her whole body shaking. The cold of the room, nothing to the cold inside her. "What is this?" Her voice came out of strangers. "You've been watching me. Since before. This isn't 3 weeks. This is my whole life. You've been..." Clara. He had gone very still in the doorway, and the color had drained from his face in a way it hadn't, even when he was dying. "Listen to me." "Don't." She backed against the wall of her own stolen face. "You said you didn't know me. You said I was just a nurse who didn't know who you were. You lied." "I didn't know," he said, and there was something breaking in his voice she had never heard. Not under gunfire, not under the surgeon's knife. "I didn't take these. I have never seen this room. My people have been watching you, yes, for 21 years, but not because of me, because of who your father was." The world tilted. "My father sold insurance," she whispered. "My father died in a..." "Your father," Dario said, and she watched the words cost him everything, watched him offer up his own throat to her, was Cormac Sullivan. 6. He made her sit down. She didn't want to. She sat anyway because her legs had stopped consulting her. He told it badly, which was how she knew it was true. A man like Dario Moretti told smooth lies and ugly truths, and this came out of him in jagged pieces, in the wrong order, with long silences where the worst of it lived. Her name was not Bennett. It had been once Sullivan. Her father, Cormac Sullivan, had run the last of the old Irish families in South Boston, a rival, a competitor, a name that meant something in a war Clara had been too young to know was happening over her own head. Her mother had taken her and run when Clara was 7, changed their name, changed their city, changed their whole lives, and told a small girl her father had died on an icy road. It had not been a road. It had been a single night, 21 years ago, when the Sullivan family was erased from the city of Boston so completely that a 7-year-old's new last name was the only piece of it left alive. "The Morettis," Clara said. The pieces were assembling themselves into a shape she could not bear to look at directly. "The Morettis did it. You, your family. Yes. The photos, the surveillance. 21 years. She looked up at him and her face was wet and she didn't care. "You weren't protecting me. You were keeping track of me, the last loose end, in case I ever became a problem." "My people were," he said. "I gave that order a long time ago, and I have not looked at the file since. I forgot you existed, Clara." The brutal honesty of it landed like a slap. "I forgot that the war had a child in it. I forgot until you said your name in that recovery room, and I felt the floor drop out of the world. Bennett. Your mother kept the rhythm of it. Bennett Sullivan. I knew. The first night. I have known for 3 weeks that the woman who saved my life was the daughter of a man my family destroyed." "Then say it." Her voice was a scrape. "All of it. Don't make me drag it out of you in the dark like everything else. Who gave the order? Who killed my father?" And Dario Moretti, who had never in his life flinched from anything, looked at the woman he had fallen in love with and did the bravest and worst thing he had ever done. "I did," he said. "I was 17. My father had just been killed, and I was the head of the family overnight. and I was told the Sullivans had done it, so I gave the order to end them. I gave it in a room full of men twice my age to prove I could. I have signed 100 death warrants since, and I remember none of their faces." His voice finally broke. "But I will remember yours until I die. Because the order I gave when I was a frightened boy is the reason you grew up without a father. It was me, Clara. I'm the storm that came for your family. I'm the thing your mother spent her whole life running from. Me." The snow fell past the great windows in absolute silence. Clara stood. She was not aware of deciding to. She crossed the room to the man she had pulled back from death with her own 2 hands. The man who had stepped in front of a bullet for her. The man who had not let himself touch her face. And she looked up into the gray eyes she had once mistaken for calm, and now understood had only ever been grief held very, very still. Then she slapped him across the face, hard enough to turn his head. He took it without moving. He would have taken 100 more. "Don't you dare," she said, shaking. "Don't you dare make me feel sorry for the boy. My father is dead." "I know. You don't get my grief. You don't get to be sad about my own father in front of me." "I know," he said again, and made no move to defend himself, and that, more than anything, was the thing that broke her in two. Because a guilty man argues, a guilty man explains. Dario Moretti simply stood there in the wreckage of what he'd told her, and let her hate him because he believed all the way down that her hatred was the only true thing he had ever earned. She walked out. He let her. She made it as far as the elevator before she understood there was nowhere to go, that her father's killer was also the only thing standing between her and the men who wanted her dead. That the storm she'd run from her whole life had been the same storm sheltering her, and that the world was so much crueler and more tangled than a girl from Dorchester had ever been allowed to know. She stood in the cold hall and she did not press the button. 7. She didn't speak to him for 2 days. He didn't try to make her. He left the penthouse to her and slept, she suspected, in some other terrible empty room, and food appeared, and the city's lights turned over below, and she sat with the impossible arithmetic of it, that the hands she had wanted on her face were the hands that had ended her family. On the 3rd day, Salvatore Greco came to dinner. Clara would not have known to fear him. He was an old man, 70 perhaps, silver-haired and soft-voiced, with the warm, roomy eyes of somebody's grandfather, and a way of holding her hand in both of his that felt fatherly, until you noticed it lasted a half-second too long. "So this is the young woman," he said, beaming when Dario introduced her with a flat reluctance she didn't understand. "The one who pulled our Dario back from the dark. We are all in your debt, my dear, all of us." He patted her hand. "Bennett, is it?" "Sullivan," Clara said, watching Dario go rigid across the room. Apparently, the old man's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did a quick, cold recalculation, gone so fast she almost doubted it, and in that flicker, Clara Bennett, who had spent 10 years reading the faces of dying men for the truth they wouldn't say, saw straight through to the bottom of him. She didn't sleep that night. She thought about the order Dario said he'd given at 17. "I was told the Sullivans had killed my father," and she thought about who tells a frightened boy a thing like that. Who benefits when a war erases the strong men on both sides and leaves a malleable child holding a throne he's too young to keep? She got up at 3 in the morning, and she went to the windowless room of her own stolen face, and this time she read the files instead of flinching from them. And there, in a margin in the precise, old-fashioned hand of a man who had been keeping the family's secrets for 50 years, she found it. A note. A date 2 days before her father died. S.G. Aldo's accident confirmed. Sullivans to be informed as responsible. The boy will act. The boy will act. Aldo, Dario's father. Accident. She was still standing there with the page in her hand when Dario found her, and she did not slap him this time. She held the paper up between them like something on fire. "Your father wasn't killed by my family," she said. "Read it. Read it. He was killed by your own consigliere, and then Salvatore told a grieving 17-year-old it was the Sullivans, so you'd start a war that wiped out everyone who could have challenged him, and left you on a throne he could run from behind. My father died for his coup, and so did yours." She watched it land. She watched 21 years of guilt rearrange itself in real time across the face of the most dangerous man in Boston into something far more frightening than guilt. "He's been in my house," Dario said very softly, "for 50 years. He held my hand at dinner," Clara said, "for half a second too long. He's going to kill me, Dario. I'm the last Sullivan. I'm the only thread that ties him to all of it. He smiled at me like a grandfather, and he's already decided." Dario looked at her, and the storm she'd seen held still in him for 3 weeks finally fully broke. "No," he said. "He isn't." 8. They came for her at the safe house, because of course Dario had moved her to a stone house on a black coastline an hour north, where the Atlantic threw itself against the rocks all night, and the nearest neighbor was a lighthouse. He'd told her it was safer there. He had not told her that he'd let it be known she was there, that he had made of her a door he wanted his enemy to walk through. She found that out when the lights died. The whole house went dark at once, generator backup, everything. And the only illumination left was the white sweep of the lighthouse passing over the windows every 9 seconds, turning the rooms into a slow strobe of black and silver. Clara stood in the kitchen with her heart in her throat, and heard under the roar of the sea the soft sound of a door that should have been locked. She did the thing her whole childhood had trained into her bones. She did not freeze. She moved low, quiet into the pantry, her hand closing around the only weapon a nurse instinctively trusts, a heavy steel pot. And she waited in the dark and counted the lighthouse sweeps and listened to the men come into the house to kill her. 3 of them. She heard them split up, and she heard very close a 4th voice, soft and warm and grandfatherly, calling out into the dark like a man playing a game with a child. "Clara, my dear, there's no need for any of this. Come out. I promise you it will be gentle, gentler than what your poor father got." The lighthouse swept. In its light, she saw Salvatore Greco standing in the kitchen doorway, and saw the long, thin shape in his soft old hand, and saw him turn toward the pantry as if he could smell her fear. The window exploded. It came inward in a hail of glass and storm, and through it came Dario Moretti, and there was nothing held still in him anymore. The gun in the consigliere's hand turned and fired, and Clara screamed, and Dario crossed the kitchen through the muzzle flash, and the breaking glass like the storm itself given a body. And then the old man was on the floor, and it was done, and the sea was roaring, and Dario was bleeding again. Of course he was bleeding again. The shoulder, the old wound, torn open one more time for her, and he was reaching for her in the strobing dark, his hands finding her face at last, finally, without permission and without apology. "Are you hit?" he was saying. "Clara, Clara, are you hit?" "No," she was crying. Her hands were on his ruined shoulder, on the blood, doing what they had always done, what they would always do. "No, you came through the window." "I will always come through the window," he said, and pressed his forehead to hers, and they knelt together on the broken glass in the sweep of the lighthouse, while his men poured into the house behind them, 2 people soaked in his blood, and her father's history holding on. It was not over. He explained it to her in the hours after, while the doctor, a different doctor, a quiet doctor, stitched his shoulder for the 2nd time, and she held his hand because she could not make herself let go. Salvatore had men. Salvatore had alliances. Salvatore had spent 50 years building rooms full of people who owed him, and now the truth was out. The old man's choice had become the only one left to him. Erase the last Sullivan, erase Dario too if he had to, and rule from the rubble the way he always had. "Then we run," Clara said. "You run," Dario said. "I end it." "That's not, Clara." He turned her hand over in his, traced the bruise his own grip had left on her wrist 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. "I have spent 21 years on a throne I built on your father's grave because an old man wanted it that way. I am going to take everything I have and burn it down to ash. The throne, the family, all of it. There won't be anything left for him to rule, and there won't be anything left to come looking for you. You'll be free, truly free. For the first time in your life, no one will be watching you in the dark." "And you?" He didn't answer, which was, she understood, with a cold drop of her stomach, its own answer. 9. He did it the way he did everything, calmly, completely, without a wasted motion. In the space of a week, Dario Moretti dismantled an empire that had taken his family 3 generations to build. He turned over ledgers and accounts and the long, patient records of 50 years to a federal prosecutor through 3 lawyers and a wall of immunity he negotiated for one person, and one person only, not himself, her. He froze and emptied and gave away. He made calls that ended things and started nothing. And on the last night, on the rooftop helipad of the building where he had lived alone, above a city that feared him, he burned the rest, the original files, the photographs, the surveillance, 21 years of a stolen girl's life in a steel drum, while the wind came off the harbor and carried the ash out over the water. Clara stood beside him and watched her childhood face curl and blacken and rise into the dark. "You're giving up everything," she said. "I'm giving up everything that was built on a lie," he said, watching the fire. "There's a difference. A man told me when I was 17 that power was the only thing that would keep me from being hurt again. He was the one who hurt me. Everything I built around that was a wall around a wound." He turned to her, and in the firelight the gray eyes were not still anymore. They were alive, terrified human. "You took the wall down the night you put your hands inside my chest and weren't afraid. I've been bleeding ever since. I don't want it back, Clara, any of it. I only want—" He stopped himself. Of course he stopped himself. He had been stopping himself for her whole life. "Say it," she whispered. "You've stopped yourself in front of me 100 times. Don't. Not tonight." And the most dangerous man in Boston, on the night he set fire to his own kingdom, said the simplest sentence of his life. "I want you. Not protected, not watched, not kept. I want you to choose me, knowing exactly what I am and exactly what I did. And if you can't, and God knows you shouldn't, then I want you free of all of it. I'll take the ending either way. But I had to say it once, where you could hear it." The fire snapped. The ash rose. The harbor breathed below them. Salvatore Greco's men came up the stairwell, while the words were still hanging in the air. 10. There were 6 of them, and there was Dario and Matteo, and a handful of the loyal, and the rooftop became, in the space of a held breath, the violent, emotional climax of everything. Gunfire, flat and enormous in the open air, muzzle flashes strobing like the lighthouse, the steel drum still burning, her childhood at the center of it all. Clara did what she had done her whole life. She did not freeze. When Matteo went down with a round through the thigh, she was already moving, dragging him behind the cover of the helipad's low wall, her hands clamping over the wound before her mind had finished telling them to, screaming at him to, keep pressure, look at me, you're not allowed to die on me." A nurse in a war doing the only sacred thing she knew how to do, which was refuse to let go of a life. And across the roof, she saw Dario, and she saw Salvatore Greco step out of the stairwell himself, soft and silver and smiling even now, even at the end, raising the thin old gun one last time, not at Dario, at her. The old man had understood, the only true thing about Dario Moretti, that you did not hurt him by killing him. You hurt him by taking the one thing he had finally, foolishly let himself want. What happened next happened in the space between 2 sweeps of the lighthouse. Dario crossed the roof. He did not shoot the old man, though he could have. He put his own body in the line of the gun, the 3rd time, the last time, the wound torn open one final way, and he took Clara's death into himself, the way he had been trying to take it from the moment he learned her name. The shot was enormous. He folded around it and kept moving, and reached Salvatore Greco and ended 50 years of lies with his bare hands. And then the rooftop was only fire and wind and the sea, and Dario Moretti was on the ground in the spreading dark, and the man who had spent his whole life being unkillable was finally after everything, just a man dying on the cold. Clara Bennett left Matteo's wound and crossed the roof on her knees, and put her hands inside his chest a 2nd time. "No," she said. It was not a prayer. It was an order in the voice that turned chaos into a list, the voice that had reached down a 40-minute hole 3 weeks ago and dragged a stranger back into the world. "No, You came back for a reason once. You do it again. You do it again, Dario, do you hear me? You do not get to tell me you love me and then leave." His eyes opened, gray and finally completely unguarded. Finding her the way they had found her in the trauma bay, the way they would find her in every room for the rest of both their lives. "There she is," he breathed, and his heart, impossibly the way it had on the first night, slowed under her hands and held, as if his body had only ever been waiting for her permission to stay. 11. The helicopter came. Of course it came. He had a rooftop helipad, and for once in his life the machinery of his terrible power was used for nothing but keeping him breathing. The 18 minutes to the only trauma center that mattered, where a tired night surgeon peeled off his gloves at dawn and said the words he'll keep in the voice of a man who had finally found something to be impressed by. Clara did not leave his side. The federal immunity held. The empire was ash. The name Moretti began slowly to mean nothing in the city of Boston, which was the only thing Dario Moretti had ever truly wanted to give her, a world that was no longer watching her in the dark. It would be a lie to call it simple after. She had loved the man who had unmade her family. She would carry her father's death and the knowledge of who had ordered it for the rest of her life. And there were nights that first year when she looked at the scar on Dario's shoulder where she had twice put him back together and could not separate the grief from the love, because they had grown in her from the same root. But this is what she came to understand in the small, bright house by the water, that was nothing at all like the lonely glass tower he'd left behind, that he never once asked her to forgive him. He simply spent every day proving he understood why she couldn't, and loving her anyway, and stopping himself 100 times less than he used to, and reaching for her hand during every storm. One evening near the end of that first year, the snow came down over the coast the way it had come down over the city the night she saved his life, and they stood at the window watching it, the way they had stood watching it once before, in a room she had called the loneliest in the world. "You're not afraid of me anymore," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Clara said. She took his scarred hand and laid it flat against her own cheek, the gesture he had denied himself for so long that he still even now held his breath when she gave it to him. "I'm afraid of how much I'm not." The most dangerous man Boston had ever feared closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. And for the first time in 21 years, there was no throne to protect, no wall to keep up, no order left to give. Only the snow and the warmth of her, and the two of them finally choosing it, knowing everything, hiding nothing, holding on. Outside, no one watched them in the dark. Inside, he never let go of her hand. And somewhere across the city that winter, in a hospital just like the one where it began, another set of doors was opening. Another night, another storm, another woman who didn't yet know that the man bleeding through them was about to become the whole of her life. But that's another story.